Although his name isn't as widely known as others like Ted Bundy, Jeffrey Dahmer, or John Wayne Gacy, this killer, cannibal, and macabre interior decorator has been responsible for inspiring multiple horror icons across the years. Ed Gein has found a wider audience as the most recent killer to garner Netflix's attention for the third season of their Monsters series, but elements of his story can be found in so many dark corners of Hollywood. Picture it, 1974, a grimy, rural location in Texas during the peak of summer heat, in a van cruising down the road kicking up dust. You can feel the dirt sticking to the sweat on your skin, and some indoor plumbing, especially a shower, sounds like a dream. You and four of your friends are on a road trip to see your grandfather's grave after word reaches you that several graves in the area have been robbed. Bodies were removed from their last resting places and put on display, some just missing pieces, others gone completely. That's the situation for Sally Hardesty, her brother Franklin, and three of their friends find themselves in Tobe Hooper's Texas Chainsaw Massacre. They continue along their way, trying to find the old family home. Along the way, they pass a slaughterhouse that leads to a very dark conversation about methods of killing livestock, a conversation that will set the tone for the remainder of the movie. Against their better judgment, they stop and pick up a hitchhiker who quickly gets himself thrown back out. How strange that they didn't want someone along who spontaneously whipped out a knife and started cutting both himself and Franklin. Finally reaching their destination, but short on gas for their van, the crew settles in to an old dilapidated house. Two of them wander off to have fun of their own, as characters in slasher films often do, and discover a quaint-looking house, even more remote than the old house they were staying in. It's very unassuming from the outside, appears to be an old farmhouse that has been well maintained. Their gas generator is running, but no signs of residents. Yet, very quickly, two wanderers make it clear as to why you should never wander into someone else's house of your own accord. Through their eyes, we get a look at the house that's far less quaint on the inside. Peeling wallpaper and animal hides are everywhere, along with bones. So many bones. Animal bones, and some very human bones. They've been used to construct furniture, decorate existing furniture, and hung from the ceiling as terrifying versions of wind chimes. Leatherface dispatches the first intruder with methods discussed earlier when talking about the slaughterhouse, all while wearing his trademark mask, skin stripped from the face of a previous victim. They've stumbled upon the Sawyer family, murderous cannibals who partake in taxidermy too grotesque to dwell upon. Meat from their victims finds its way to their table and to local businesses who sell it to unsuspecting folks passing through. All kinds of crazy butchering and repurposing of human bodies happening, just like it did in the hands of Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield. Ed Gein was born in 1906 in Wisconsin into a terrible family environment. Side note, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre sounds so much more intimidating than, say, the Wisconsin Chainsaw Massacre, doesn't it? Anyways, back to Ed's home life. His father was an alcoholic, and in true serial killer fashion, his relationship with his mother was incredibly warped. She was a religious nut who taught him that women were inherently evil, especially as far as sex was concerned. Ed had an older brother, Henry, but most reports say their relationship was never that close. They lived on a remote farm in Wisconsin, limiting the amount of normal human contact they could have as they grew up. After their father died in 1940, Ed and Henry took over running the farm and working odd jobs to try and keep their family afloat. Henry passed away in 1944 in the midst of a fire on the farm, and while there's been a lot of speculation that Ed may have been responsible for his brother's untimely demise, there's never been any conclusive proof. The biggest tragedy for Ed would have been the death of his mother in 1945. He sealed off her bedroom, making sure it would remain perfectly intact. Who knows how long Ed waited before trying to exhume her body, but her casket was protected by concrete, denying him access he was trying to gain. Ed didn't let this derail his plans though, and he found another way to try and resurrect his dear old mom. Within a couple of years of her death, Ed began digging up the bodies of recently deceased, middle-aged women who reminded him of his mother. He would skin them and sew together various pieces to create a skin suit that he intended to wear to actually become his mother. Sounds familiar, right? Removing pieces of other people's bodies to wear? Ed was a bit more delicate than Leatherface with his removal of skin though, and also he used pieces from bodies to make furniture and decorate around his home. His questionable methods of interior decoration were brought to a halt in 1957 when authorities finally discovered what he'd been doing. He was responsible for at least 2 murders, local women Bernice Warden and Mary Hogan, rather than simply robbing graves to find the materials he needed. Not a shock to anyone, Ed found himself in custody at a state facility for mental health treatment, or at least what passed as mental health treatment, back in the 50s and 60s. The farmhouse burnt down not long after he was taken into custody, and it's assumed the cause was arson. While for many, it was a dark tourist destination, the locals wanted nothing more than to forget that part of their history. Unfortunately for them, people just won't let it stay buried. There are clearly some similarities between Texas Chainsaw Massacre and the events that happened at the Gein farm, despite the creative liberties taken with the movie. They had a similar interest in repurposing body parts, shared hobbies like grave robbing and furniture building, and a complete lack of respect for the recently deceased. Ed was very much a loner, while the Sawyers adhered to their own philosophy: the family that slays together stays together. Ed primarily harvested body parts he needed from the recently deceased, while Leatherface and the rest of the Sawyer family take an incredibly amount of enjoyment from hunting down their own prey and torturing them extensively before ending their lives. They're incredibly sadistic and proud of it, making no attempts to hide. As for other movies related to Ed Gein and his crimes, I'm sure some of you have wondered if Psycho from the 1960s would come up, since that's the movie most oftenly associated with Ed Gein, and it was released just a couple years after his crimes came to light. Norman Bates is clearly a much more direct inspiration, given his own obsession with his mother. Norman was able to retrieve his mother's body though, and developed an entire persona that allowed him to continue on with his life as though she were still living in the home with him. Do you know who's the third murderous movie character with roots at the Gein farm? Ironically, this notorious character isn't the lead antagonist when he makes his appearance on the big screen. Buffalo Bill from Silence of the Lambs, a film from 1991, plays second fiddle to Hannibal Lecter, the genius cannibal, but there's no denying Bill's own dastardly deeds in this classic thriller. While his fixation wasn't centered so heavily around his mother, Buffalo Bill was determined to create his own female skin suit from pieces of his victims. Even if you haven't watched this film, almost everyone has heard quotes from the conversation involving the lotion, the basket, and getting the hose again. It's clearly not a new phenomenon for Hollywood to pick real horrors as the basis for fictional ones, though depictions of killers have certainly become more glamorous in recent years. It has sparked some debate between victims' families and show or movie creators, but this newer style of adaptations draw a tremendous audience. Some films may take more creative liberties with concepts than others do, and they often contain a disclaimer that any similarities to real events are completely coincidental. However, there's no denying the influence these very real killers have had on our culture and entertainment.